Today in Virginia, opening statements were made in the criminal trial of former Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort, a case considered a first act for special counsel Robert Mueller. The former lobbyist's fate now lies in the hands of 6 men and 6 women. Manafort, as you probably know, faces a 32-count indictment of bank and tax fraud for allegedly hiding millions of dollars in income from his work as a consultant in Ukraine. The trial, one of 2 Manafort will face, is expected to last 3 weeks with high-profile testimony, including from one of his closest aides, Rick Gates, a former Trump campaign aide himself. But don't expect to hear a lot about the president or even Russia, for that matter. In fact, prosecutors say they don't intend to introduce the topic of collusion at all, nor will any of their witnesses, according to them, even utter the word Russia. But that did not stop the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, from driving home this new defense of the president.
What I'm saying is he was never involved in intimate business relationships with Donald Trump. I mean, that's just 4 months. They're not going to be colluding about Russians, which I don't even know if that's a crime, colluding about Russians. The hacking is the crime. The hacking is the crime.
That certainly is the original
crime. Well, the president didn't hack.
This morning, Donald Trump doubled down on that defense, tweeting, "Collusion is not a crime," but that doesn't matter because there was no collusion except by crooked Hillary and the Democrats, whatever that means. Here now to help us sort out what the Manafort trial means for the president going forward are Brian Kelly. He's a partner in Nixon Peabody, a former Assistant U.S. attorney who oversaw the prosecution of Whitey Bulger. It's good to see you, Brian.
Nice to see you,
Ron
Jim.
Sullivan is a Harvard Law School professor, not former, I think he's still there, and director of Harvard's Criminal Justice Institute. He served as one of Aaron Hernandez's attorneys in a successful defense in that double murder case. Ron, good to see you.
Likewise.
So, Brian, starting with you, while Manafort has deep ties, we know, to Russian-aligned politicians, nothing in the trial relates to Trump or Russia. And as I just said, the prosecutor said you won't even hear the name Russia. So is the only relevance to the president that this guy, Manafort, might ultimately flip? Is that why we're watching this closely?
I think that is why we're watching it. The case itself is kind of a run-of-the-mill bank fraud, tax evasion case, big numbers, a lot of money at stake, but it appears that Mueller's hope is to convict him and then pressure him to perhaps give evidence that Mueller is looking for.
You're not in agreement. Yes, that's the whole deal?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's a normal case, run-of-the-mill. The one other thing that would interest the president and scare the president is that you just don't want criminality that close to the White House in any respect. You know, so that bothers them, too.
I have to say, one of the things I don't understand is, one of the many things I don't understand, I don't understand why this case is going forward anyway. Early on in the pretrial proceedings, Judge, I think his name is Ellis, said, and I'm paraphrasing, what does this have to do with the jurisdiction of the special prosecutor? And he was pretty tough. A lot of people saying this case is going to get thrown out. And then ultimately the judge says, let's proceed. Why is this case proceeding? This is not, at least in my layperson's understanding of what Bob Mueller is supposed to be prosecuting, is it?
Well, when the judge actually read what Mueller's charge was, this was consistent with the charge. I agree in principle, though, that
you'd be arguing the same thing.
I would be arguing the same thing if I were defense counsel. And as a scholar of criminal law, I think that we give these special prosecutors, independent prosecutors, way too much latitude anyway. And I don't think it's good for the criminal justice system.
Why did the judge let this go forward?
Well, legally, they may have a charge that they can prove. Bank fraud and tax evasion are pretty simple crimes. But I agree with you. This has nothing to do with Mueller's original authorization. It is beyond the scope of what he was authorized to pursue. But the judge may have said, well, a crime's a crime, and let's proceed in this court and see where it goes.
Are you surprised there wasn't a plea in this case? I am surprised there was not a plea. Again, Gates is number 2 for a while. It did plead and is going to testify against. Are you surprised Manafort hadn't?
Well, yes and no. I mean, he to get a plea, he has to have something to offer. There may, in fact, be nothing for him to offer, so Mueller wasn't going to give him a deal. Or maybe Mueller was driving too hard a bargain, and he said, let's take it to a jury and see what these people do.
We should say he was in, we don't know what happened, he was in that infamous June meeting in Trump Tower with Don Jr., et cetera. Are you surprised there was no deal here?
Well, there's a third option. He may be thinking that a pardon is coming and holding out for a pardon.
Yeah, but if you're the President of the United States, if you're going to pardon someone, you pardon them before before all this stuff is on the floor in the testimony, it would seem to me, rather than after.
One would think, but I've been unsuccessful as a President Trump whisperer, so who knows?
Can I go back? I tried cases, I think, before you were born, give or take a couple of years, but I mean, a long time ago. If I were the prosecutor in this case, which is what you used to do for a living, my greatest fear would be there's somebody sitting on that jury who believes that fake news is all around us.
And that this is a witch hunt designed to get the president.
Exactly.
I'm going to hold out.
Exactly.
And that's why I think the prosecutors are better served not mentioning Trump. The case has nothing to do with Trump. Just stick to the bank fraud, stick to the tax evasion. If they get their conviction, see what happens afterwards. But I agree with you. There could be people in the jury who are very partisan one way or another, and that may be reflected in the verdict if there is a verdict. It might be a hung jury.
What would you have done here as a prosecutor, if anything, to try to inoculate the jury? I mean, even though the Trump name will come up, you got to be an idiot to not understand the defendant in this case had some connection, even if you don't know he was chair. And again, if you're adherent to the notion, we saw the other day, 75% of Republicans believe Trump more than they believe the media. If you're one of those people, even if it hasn't been broached in the courtroom, you're a pretty risky proposition. What do you do about that? Is there anything you can do about it?
You know, there's voir dire. The voir dire process is supposed to root out what people actually know about who's on trial and who's not. And I don't know what happened in the actual voir dire. Each judge handles it differently. And you'd be amazed at how much people don't know. They'll go into trial and they haven't read anything about it. They might not know who this guy is, other than the fact he's charged with money crimes and he spent a lot of money, and the prosecution is going to taint him with his lavish lifestyle. So I think it's not that extraordinary to get a jury in a case like this who will be unaware of what's really happening.
And so what I hadn't thought of until I just heard Brian, if he said if I were a prosecutor, I would stay away from any reference to Trump. So does that lead me to the conclusion that if I'm a defense lawyer, I try to work Trump into the conversation in hopes that one of those 12 men and women is a fake news believer?
If not Trump directly, anti-government bias.
Right.
Yes, that's precisely how I would try that case if I were a defense.
And they get 5 prosecutors sitting there. I mean, how many prosecutors do you need? I would push that angle hard.
Can we step back for a second? We talked about Giuliani, and it's by my take, there's been an evolution on, quote, collusion. We had no contact with any of the Russians, and then it was clear we did have contact. So there was no collusion with the Russians. And then the latest evolution is what you saw a minute ago. He didn't say even if there was collusion. But even if there was collusion, it's not a crime. Is it a crime?
Well, it depends what you're calling collusion. The title USC code is pretty filled with different crimes. Conspiracies are crimes. So a clever prosecutor can always make something a crime if it.
You were a clever prosecutor.
Yeah, and so a conspiracy is a pretty broad statute. So I don't know what they're referring to as collusion.
The word collusion.
But if his point is that Mueller has yet to date to prove anything regarding Russian collusion and disruption with the Trump campaign, they're accurate.
Well,
whether or not it's a crime is something else.
By the way, Rudy Giuliani agrees with him. Here's what he said to Axios yesterday. Why don't you write a report and show us what you have, because they don't have a goddamn thing. It's like a guy playing poker. He's bluffing, and he's only got a pair of twos. Do you agree with Brian and Rudy Giuliani that so far they got nothing?
I don't. There have been a number of convictions. I forget the number now, but a large number of convictions. So the former mayor is correct. There's no federal crime called collusion. He's being too clever by half. So the problem is whether there is a conspiracy to commit some underlying crime involving Russia. And, there's a lot of smoke here. I can't speculate as to whether there's fire in the White House, but there's a lot of smoke.
Do you not even think there's smoke so far, Brian?
Well, there's a lot of self-generated smoke by Mueller's, 13 prosecutors. They're indicting people all over the place, but nothing has suggested that he's found any actual involvement with the Trump campaign and the Russians.
But is there anything that suggests that he hasn't found anything vis-a-vis Trump and the Russians? I mean, you would play your cards pretty close to the vest when you were doing your old job, wouldn't you?
Well, yes, I would. But he's spending a lot of time trying to convict Manafort. He obviously hopes Manafort has some evidence that will help his probe that he was authorized to do. And we'll see after trial what happens.
Credibility obviously is a huge thing with virtually everything. Here's Stephen Colbert's rather odd take on the lack of credibility of the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. Just watch.
I like Michael Cohen. The man is a liar, a proven liar.
Michael's not going to lie. He's going to tell the truth.
There's nobody that I know that knows him that hasn't warned me that if he's back us up against the wall, he'll lie like crazy, because he's lied all his life.
Putting Golem aside for a moment, and Giuliani, I think, has some credibility problems. So does Michael Cohen. I mean, essentially the press, my colleagues, have sort of bought this notion. The latest allegation from the Cohen camp is the President of the United States, candidate Trump, knew about the meeting in Trump Tower June of 2016 before it happened, even though he denied he did. He admits he has no corroborating evidence. Why would anybody believe a guy who is I think, convincingly lied at virtually every turn. Cohen,
That's precisely what any good defense attorney would say. They say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you heard this man raise his right hand and say, my name is Michael Cohen. That's the last truthful thing you heard come out of that man's mouth.
But that's a good point in this case, isn't it?
That is a good point. But prosecutors, on the other hand, will always say, look, we take the witnesses how we find them. When people are in dirty businesses, then they sometimes have dirt associated with them. So, it's going to be a battle in terms of credibility.
Could you shore up Michael Cohen's credibility?
Well, I think he's a bizarre individual. Here he is tape recording his own client. It's very strange behavior. I think Mr. Colbert has some credibility problems as well.
What did he do?
Well, nothing that I'm going to accuse him of here. But, look, Cohen's a strange individual, and he's going to be attacked viciously if the government tries to use him as a witness.
We got to go. Brian, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for your time. Ron, you as well.
Great, thanks.
You.